All right, looks like we have a good quorum. Welcome everyone to the Networking Masterclass. We have a lot of great content today, so I'm going to go ahead and kick off the webinar. So if you're new to us or new to GoToWebinar in general, a few items that I'd like to mention just for general housekeeping. So you should now be hearing audio and it should be crystal clear. If you're having trouble with the audio or it doesn't sound that great, you may have better success if you change perhaps from phone call to computer or the other way around. Also, if you'd like to switch to phone call and you don't see your phone number listed in the panel, you can go under problem dialing in and choose one of the other numbers available local to your country. Next, this is a live and interactive webinar, and it is not the same without your direct feedback. So we encourage you to write your questions here and comment to us throughout the presentations. We love to hear from you, and we'll do our best to get back to you in real time during the webinar. And if for any reason we cannot get back to you, or perhaps you think of a question later, you can always write to us at networkingmasterclass@citrix.com. Lastly, this session is being recorded and we'll make the recording available after the webinar. So if you need to step away or you just like to review or listen to some of the content again later, or perhaps share it with a colleague, we'll be sending out a link to access the recording after the webinar. So fear not if you need to miss some of the content or take another call. So we have a packed agenda today. I'm your host, Dave Potter, for the Americas session. And joining us today are guest presenters Michael Aldridge, Avinash, and Pushkar, as well as a few additional guest presenters that will be giving us a couple demos. We have a very packed agenda. I mentioned that we've got a lot to cover today, so you guys are in luck for a fantastic content-packed webinar today. So to kick things off, we'll be starting with Michael Aldridge to talk about all the things that we're doing with business continuity and high availability in the modern day with all the current changes in networking. Next, after Michael, we'll be following things up with API gateway and security. So Pushkar and Avinash will be giving us a talk about that. We'll actually go a little bit in a different order here. We'll be talking about what we're doing with the Citrix ADC service first, and they'll be rounding things out with the API gateway. And then the last thing will be the news and views, and I'll close out the webinar with that. So again, we'd love to get your feedback in the Q&A, and I'd just like to encourage you, if some of the content today sparks an interest or you'd like to hear a little more detail or you have some ideas that you'd like for us to cover in the future, I invite you to submit any requests or ideas that you have for future topics into the Q&A panel so that we can be considered, or so that it can be considered for a future masterclass. All right, so with that, I'd like to kick it over to Michael, our first presenter, to talk to us about what we're doing, all in terms of the ADC and business continuity. So Michael, are you with us?
I am indeed, Dave. Thanks very much for the introduction. I'm just going to take, you've given me screen control. Thank you.
You've got it.
Right. So thanks very much for the intro, Dave, and welcome everyone. I extend my welcome to you all on the call today. So as Dave has sort of said, you know, wanting to talk about high availability and business continuity in my session today for the next sort of 45 minutes. And I just hope that my screen catches up with me. There we go. So we're going to cover a few areas. Okay, so business continuity, it seems to be on everybody's mind at the moment given the current situation we all find ourselves in, but to be honest, it's something that a lot of organizations have been thinking about for a very, very long time. I think about how we deal with it at Citrix for our own infrastructure and organization. We've got one of our head offices sitting down in Florida in the middle of Hurricane Alley. You know, we think of business continuity all the time. You know, we constantly get updates about how our colleagues are doing, what our offices are doing, if they're open, if they're closed, and it's just become more to the fore for everyone across the globe because of the current situation we're in. So we're going to talk a little bit about it, you know, the considerations from hardware to licensing to monitoring, those sorts of things that you don't always think about when it comes to sort of talking about HA and business continuity. We then look at high availability, and I've got a little demo for you on that, how high availability works. And then we go into GSLB concepts, and then down to auto-scaling and clustering. So what I'm basically wanting to do with this sort of build out as we go through this is show you the different aspects that you've got available to you as consumers of an ADC environment. Now, as I've said, there's all manner of events that can trigger an HA or a business continuity response, from that hurricane bearing down on us in our offices to outages of power in our area and everything that sits in between them. Now, with an ADC, you are actually several steps ahead of the curve in terms of making sure that you can keep your business running. Now, if we look holistically at an environment that may be impacted, I'm wanting to draw your focus onto 6 key areas that relate directly to the ADC and that can take the load for you. So the first one we're going to look at is app server failure and performance issues that you see popping up on the screen here. Now, application servers can fail at any time or suffer performance issues. Now, these apps may not just be for your employees, giving them access to your VPN or to the SaaS applications critical for your sales motions or things like that, but it can also be providing information and resources to your business partners and even to your customers. Now, with the Citrix server load balancing, you will be able, or you will never be in a position of sending requests to failed servers. Now, you'll turn around to me and say, "Yeah, but Mike, that's load balancing through and through." And yes, you're quite right. That is load balancing through and through. But what we do within the ADC is we routinely check the health and the servers of a load balancing group. The physical health of the server, the underlying software, and the network connectivity in the data center. If anything fails, the ADC will send a request to an alternate server, and we've got specific health monitors that we're able to leverage to give us that true finger on the pulse of how that application and that server is doing. If we shift it up a gear and we look at high availability itself, and this is something, as I've mentioned on the agenda slide, I'll delve into shortly. Simply put, if you experience an ADC failure, you're wanting to ensure that an HA pair, or better still, a clustered environment, is able to take on the load. Now, often with an HA style of an environment, it isn't tested. So a failover isn't tested because you deploy it, you put it in, and I've been guilty of this in my labs. You know, I put in a pair of ADCs, and hey presto, you know, don't look at them for forever and a day unless I'm doing a configuration change. But it is always prudent to test the HA to make sure that it is able, it's up to the task to sort of meet the needs as and when the time comes. Now, obviously, HA, you've got active, passive scenarios, and I'll delve into that in a moment. But there are scenarios where you're actually wanting active. So you're wanting 100% uptime of everything. It's better utilization of investment and things like that. Now, I'm not a figures person, so I'll leave that to yourselves to that quandary to work through. But if you're looking at the likes of clustering, everything is active. Great thing from an IT's admin point of view is because it's active all the time, even when a failover happens, you know it's working because you've been using it the whole time through. So it's actually one less thing to sort of think about on the process checklist. We then want to sort of look at data center failure and performance issues. Now, from time to time, you know, as with applications service failing, the data center may fail. Perhaps a power outage or performance issues, things like that. Now, when this happens, it's reassuring to know that you can actually set up a backup data center that can take the load for you. Now, with the ADC constantly monitoring the health of the data center and the servers in it, you can be confident that in the event of such a failure or the failure of traffic, it will automatically be diverted to the next site. And again, this is something that we refer to as global server load balancing. I'm a very big advocate of GSLB and the benefits it brings. And it's not just the case of, oh, well, I'll shift it over, I'll shift my failed data center or the clients over from a failed data center to a live one, but it also gives you proximity load balancing. So sending users to areas or to a location that is closest to their data. So for me, as an example, I travel over to Americas and I'm wanting to do my work. I will log in via our gateway in Americas, and the gateway will go, hang on, Mike, your data and your desktop sits in EMEA, so we're just going to shift you over to the EMEA gateway so that I am accessing my ingress point is at the closest point to my data. It takes that load and that burden off your sort of back-end infrastructure. It's vitally important, your back-end pipe that you're wanting to sort of keep for critical functions. Now, application failure and performance issues, again, we want this health monitoring there. And if I call out one of our own protocols that we've got within Citrix that works with our apps and desktop portfolio, we're able to interrogate our protocol more effectively and deeper than anyone else in the market, obviously because it's our own. So we are actually able to determine if a specific desktop server or desktop application server is viable, it is responding not just to a ping. Hey, the server can respond to a ping, but the application layer that sits above the OS layer may have been shut off. The service may have stopped or it may have crashed. So we don't want that black hole being seen or being sort of seen by the users, as I should say. Network and internet issues, during disruptions, users and customers frequently have to traverse lower quality networks. For example, your branches might have fast connectivity, but your employees in their home offices may be restricted to home broadband or even 3G, 4G type of connections. Now, as soon as we start switching onto commercial consumer broadband technologies, the contention ratios that you would see on such connection types increases. So you will get degradation in sort of traffic there. Now, within the ADC, there is a variety of optimization techniques that can help improve the delivery of your applications across these difficult networks. We've got the likes of compression, can reduce the number of round trips to get the content. Caching can improve the speed of the processing requests. There's various front-end content optimizers that help the application render quicker. And there are various protocols, TCP optimizations, that help improve your data transport from the application to the user in these slow or congested networks. And finally, the last one I'm sort of wanting to look at is the private cloud and the private cloud issues. Now, if your private cloud where you host your applications, or for that matter, it could be a public cloud that you're currently using, if there is a failure there, you want to be able to shift to use an alternate resource. Now, Citrix ADC is available in all the major public clouds, and you can shift your workloads from a failed cloud to an alternate provider quickly and easily. And this is basically fundamental to the ADC. We have a consistent code base that makes the ADC very, very portable. So whether you're running it on physical appliances in your data center or virtual appliances on your own provided hypervisor in your data center, or our SDX platform in your data center, or VPX is our virtual platforms that sit in the different public cloud providers, the configuration that they have is exactly the same. Now, whatever reason for the failure or the application there may be, you're wanting your components to be viable. You're wanting to say, right, you know, I want the ADC to help restore my business and the application experience for your workforce and your customers almost instantaneously. You don't want to leave them hanging. So to that end, let's look closer at some of the points that I mentioned. And as I said, specifically focusing in on HA. And I've mentioned HA as a active passive configuration. And when we refer to HA, you'll hear this often when I'm going through my demo. We talk about the nodes as being primary and secondary. Now, when we configure an HA pair, it is advised to always configure the primary node. Now, I know many of you are probably thinking, well, hang on, Mike. I know a little bit about ADC, the Citrix ADC, and you're saying you've got two nodes, node 1 and node 2, and they're in an HA pair. How do I know which one is the primary? Well, when you log into the GUI, it will actually give you a big yellow box. If you're on the secondary, it says you're connecting to a secondary node. Any changes made will not be replicated to the primary node. But on top of that, it also has the indicator at the top right-hand corner of our GUI screen that says, hey, this is the secondary node, or hey, this is the primary node, and that's what you're working with. Personally, myself, what I always like to do is, rather than hit my NSIP, my main management IP address of my ADCs, I direct my traffic, or I do my management via a mapped IP address, a MIP, or a subnet IP address, a SNIP, that has been given specific access or been granted permissions to utilize the GUI and configuration systems in this way. Warning here would be that if you are going to take that route, make sure you have in place necessary security measures so that you're protecting that management IP. Always make sure that your management IP is guarded to make sure you're secure. And again, I'll show this to you in a few moments' time. Now, obviously, there are multiple ways the configuration is propagated. We can do a configuration synchronization. You know, I just click on I go to the HA node and say synchronize the configuration, done and dusted. But you know, there's also command propagation, and what happens is that it will tick over, and then as soon as a failure happens, the execution from primary to secondary, the commands are propagated across. And you can see the bottom of the screen there, some of the communication types and the communication tie-ins that we have running within the environment, and a couple of sort of tips and tricks that you have there. And talking about tips and tricks, here, as you know, a couple more as you're working through. And the one I wanted to call out is that if you bring two ADCs up at the same time, and you tell them that they are already in an HA pair, what will happen is, once they're booted, it won't go through to what I would term a democratic election, because they are both identical. The node that has the lower IP address is set as primary. Okay, so that is something to bear in mind. And you know, when I build out HA pairs, again, a bit of a best practice from my side of things, I always set things to be stay primary, stay secondary, bring everything up, and once it's working, synchronization has happened, then I get the two nodes to participate in high availability. And again, this is something that I'll show you shortly. Now, when a failure does happen, so when that primary does go down, we do send a gratuitous ARP up the chain to our switches to say, hey, hang on, you know, this IP address no longer resides at this MAC address, is now redirected to another MAC address. Another best practice would be to use virtual MAC addresses or floating MAC addresses, so that there is less congestion, less traffic, less confusion on your switches, and having to necessarily rebuild those MAC address tables that you have got on those edge switches. Obviously, what you want to do is you want to minimize the amount of changes you make to those MAC address tables on that sort of a node switch, predominantly for a security reason, because you don't want MAC injection happening there. So with that, and before I go into the demo, I'm going to take a brief pause here. I've been speaking extremely fast, and I'm going to say, Dave, have you got any questions that you want to shout out before we go into the demo?
Things look pretty good. So I think we've got everything covered for you there, Michael. You've been great. I think everyone's just taking it in.
Okay, excellent, excellent. Okay, so if we go into the demo now, and I'm sure everybody who's sort of sat in on our master classes in the past, you know, they see our famous red, green, and blue servers just sitting at the back there. And what I'll do is I'll endeavor to get them to switch over. So obviously there's a bit of load on my ADC going through as I click through the red, green, and blue. Very simplistic. I've only got one ADC operational at the moment. Okay, so if I bring in my workstation, so I'll bring in a workstation that I'm using to connect to my data that sits in my data center, so I can see my ADCs from the LAN side, if you will, because remember, my management, I always only want my management interfaces to be accessible from the secure side of my network. So here I've got my ADC sitting there. I can go to system. I'll go to high availability. I can, whoops, and it needs me to log in again. So I've left this logged in for too long. So forgive me for that. So just log in quickly. Go back to system. Go to high availability. And I'll click on nodes, and you'll notice that there isn't any other node defined. And that's just primarily because I haven't started my second NetScaler yet. So before I do the second, sorry, I called it NetScaler, my Citrix ADC, I do apologize. My Citrix ADC, before I start my second one, I'm wanting to go and make sure that this one that is operational and feeding me this web page red, green, blue server here, I'm wanting to make sure that that stays as primary. So I'm going to set this flag to say stay primary, and I'll just drop down and say okay. So that now says primary, master state primary, node state stay primary. Brilliant. I'm just going to click the save the configuration there, confirm that I'm wanting to save the configuration. And with that, what I will now do is I will now start my second ADC, my ADC number 2. Now this will take a few moments to boot up, but you know, because I've already run through this demo a couple of times when I was going through it to make sure it was working for our call today, I've already got the configuration that you see on this ADC on my secondary ADC because I'd already synchronized it. So that is another reason I'm wanting to take the cautious measure of making sure that this primary is my primary, remains my primary. Again, my reasoning is because there's a configuration on my secondary node, but for your reasoning could be the fact that you've gone and spent a good deal of time building out your ADC configuration on this 201 server here, and then you bring in 202, it's got no configuration, and it says, oh, hang on, I've got a, let's say 200, I've got a lower IP address than you. I'm now primary, and I'm going to synchronize my configuration, which has nothing on it. And you could potentially lose your configuration there. Obviously, there's things in the background that you can recover it by looking at the config files via your WinSCP or something of that ilk. But obviously, that's something you're wanting to sort of avoid. So now I can see that my secondary ADC has come up. So if I just go over here, and I'll just refresh this screen. You can see that it's now letting me log in or wanting me to log in. I will log in here, And whilst that's doing that, again, draw your attention, you know, HA status not configured because I've got no additional nodes sitting here. So what I now want to do is I'm wanting to go and add. So I'll come in, I'm on my primary, or the ADC that I want to be primary. I'll come in here and I'll say, right, I'm wanting I'm wanting to add a node that sits at 192.168.3.202, which is that node there. All right. I'll click back here. I want to go in as NS root, and I'll just copy my password over. So bear with me, copy, and I will paste it in there, and secure access. I just want to draw your attention to these little information bubbles that we've got here, and I just hovered over the one to the right of secure access there. You know, this one's pretty self-explanatory. You know, access remote systems using secure access HTTPS. We could kind of guess that from the name of the field. But when we start looking at our GSLB configurations in a few moments time, I've got screen grabs of that for you. Those little information bubbles are invaluable because it gives you information of what is a local system, what is a remote system, what IP address am I expecting here, what IP address am I expecting in this field. So they do become very, very useful. So whilst we do that, so I'll just click create, and it'll go and it'll say to me that I've got too many nodes. So what I've done is I've obviously got, there we go. So it's sitting there. So its state is unknown. I think it's pulling up a residue from my last configuration that I had from my call earlier today. But you can see there that I've got number one. So NS1 is the one that I'm on now. Stay primary, and the state of the secondary is unknown. So if I come into the secondary, yes, it's asking me about an RPC password. I actually haven't, that has been changed. So I'll show you how to do that in a few moments. Come to my HA, I'll click on nodes, and what you can see there is it has got the details of NS2 secondary, the node status up, it's stay primary. So what I now want to do is I'm wanting to get number one to participate in the HA. But before I do that, I'm wanting to force a synchronization. So if I just unselect that, I'll just unselect that, and I want to go and select action here, and I'm wanting to force synchronization. So I go force synchronization, options come up here again, what I want to do, I just want to force synchronization, click OK, and it will go through. Okay, now, as I say, that the reason that I'm getting the issue here as an unknown down is because my RPC password does not match between the two systems. So what I'm going to do here is I'll go down again under system, I will go to network, and then I will go down and click on RPC. There we go. And I'll go back up because it's hang on, where is it? Yep, there it is. And then I'll click on this one, which is 202. I will click on edit. And my password, I will put it in here. I will reset the password. Oh, hang on. What I'll do is I'll put the password in there that I wanted. I'm wanting to make sure it's secure, and I'll click OK. So now that my RPC password has been set and it should match what I originally configured here, I can come in and force a synchronization. So that will go through. I want to now, I've just got to give it some time to catch up. I'm wanting to go and tell node 1 to participate in an HA environment. So I'll go in and say actively participate. I will click OK. And what will happen now, if I click here, you notice how if I come to HA, click on my nodes, how it's no longer saying that the node state for 201 was stay primary. It is now specifically giving it a green light, red light indicator. So it is showing that it is up, and it is showing that it is active. So if I come back to this area and I click click refresh on my browser, the same story. Again, There we go. You know, I'm still being served my red, green, blue server. No problems. So I'm going to be a little bit aggressive, and I'm just going to go and turn off my ADC1. So I'll just force a shutdown on my hypervisor. And whilst I expect nothing to change on this environment, because now all of a sudden I've just transitioned all of my load balancing of my red, green, blue server to my secondary node, my view of this GUI that we've got here for 201 will no longer be operational, because that that ADC, sorry, no longer works. So you can see that's just going to spin and spin and spin and spin until it times out on my browser. However, if I come here to 202, stated as secondary at the moment, I'm going to click on refresh. It changes it to primary. So I know that node number 2 is my primary, and I can come back here and you can see that I am still getting my traffic, even though node number 1, which is the one I was using initially, no longer is operational. So that brings me to the end of that sort of piece of the demo on the high availability. Is there anything we want to throw out as questions, Dave?
I think we're still pretty good. There was one that came up about the RPC password. Do you
Yes.
have anything that you want to add there? Because I know we made some changes recently with regards to RPC and security.
Yes, so RPC, you know, there are specific things that you need to be cautious of if you do use it. I made the quip on a previous call. You know, make sure it's complex, make sure it's unique. Don't go using your NS root password. Also, always make sure that you flag it as secure. That is very, very big, because obviously the communication that's happening between the two nodes for the synchronization is utilizing that RPC handshaking user credential. And if that is compromised, a nefarious actor could potentially get your configuration, certificate signatures, and everything for them to use. So you've got to be very cautious of that. There are many ways to secure your ADC. And as I said, you know, I'm very cautious. No management on any IPs outside of my secure network. Passwords are complex. I typically always change NS root. NS root doesn't exist on my systems. Typically, I'm using one of our demo center environments at the moment. I always can NS root, but obviously don't can NS root unless you've set up an equally privileged account first. That's the last thing you're wanting to do. And those are the key things. I'm trying to think what else you're wanting to do. I think those are the key things that jump to my mind,
Yeah.
Dave.
Yeah. Also getting some questions about, so you showed a great demo of the transition. Would the process be the same if you were to do an upgrade, or does the firmware matter?
Yes. Okay. So great question there. So I'll do it backwards. You said, is it the same for an upgrade? And then does the firmware matter? So firstly, in an HA pair, the nodes have to be identical. Okay, identical firmware, identical appliance. So when I refer to appliance, that could be a virtual appliance, a physical appliance. They have to be the same. So if I'm utilizing a VPX 3000 on node 1, node 2 has to be a VPX 3000 as well. Now, when it comes to the firmware, the way you saw me bring the second one, the upgrade of firmware, I should say, the way you saw me bring up node 2 to incorporate it, the way I would recommend you do an upgrade, and again, there's a plethora of how-to guides and best practices available on the web if you do a simple search. But my view is you set the two nodes to stay primary and stay secondary. And then what you do is you can upgrade your primary and check to see if everything's working. And if it's working, you know, good, you're solid. If anything's broken, obviously you just shut that one down and start up your secondary, and that becomes your primary straight away. So always try and do it in that measure, in a measured approach, so that you can say, right, if I've made specific configuration settings on there for the APIs or the Nitro calls on my ADCs that I'm using, if I go and do an upgrade, is anything going to break or any calls going to be affected? And that's the way to do it. I would do it that way. That's the way yeah. I don't know what more
Fantastic.
I can say to that.
No, that's fantastic. Thanks, Michael. That's pretty much what we've got from the questions.
Okay, excellent. So now, folks, if we take the next look, the next step, okay, we've spoken about high availability. Oh, you know, Mike, that's great. It can be, we're talking singular data centers potentially here, with high availability, with the two nodes sitting in the same place. But we now want to talk about global server load balancing. Now, fundamentally, global server load balancing, or GSLB, is a DNS-based solution that load balances services between geographically distributed locations. And the Citrix ADC system can be configured to act as either an authoritative DNS or as a DNS proxy. Again, you'll notice that I'm using the term DNS a lot because GSLB does rely on this service immensely. So GSLB operates under the same general principles as load balancing, but the DNS is the way that we're directing the client requests. So typical GSLB uses would be distribution of network traffic across multiple sites, distribution of server load across multiple sites, our disaster recovery. I spoke about me being over in America, wanting to do my work and being pushed over to the EMEA data center because that's where my data sits. You know, this sort of thing is. It also helps us reduce the application latency that we might see within our environments. So as we go through, you know, and we have a look at the specifics of it, with ordinary DNS, when a client sends a DNS request, it receives a list of IPs from the domain or service, and it will then typically take that first IP in the list and initiate a connection based upon that information. The DNS server will then use a technique called DNS round robining to rotate through the IPs on the list. So therefore, sending the IP we've just used to the bottom of the list and then moving all the others up a level, so sort of promoting them, if you will. This ensures a crude way of equally distributing the load, but actually, you know, that does not support disaster recovery at all, or load balancing based on load, or proximity of the server, or persistence. So it does none of those things. So as I build the slide out, you'll actually see how GSLB could come to the rescue in this simple site, sort of multi-site environment. As you know, NS1 says, hey, I've got too many collections. Can you take one for the team? And it passes it over to site 2 to work through the necessary transactioning. Now, if we look specifically at authoritative DNS or ADNS, the ADC is an authoritative source for a domain and all the records within that domain, or it can be. It can be configured with single or multiple instances of a DNS server. And in this case, each instance will listen to all the different IPs. Well, sorry, let me rephrase that. Will listen on a different IP, but will have all of the IP instances in its name table. Now, what you've got to remember when you're doing authoritative DNS service is you need to create a start of authority, which is an SOA, and a name server, an NS record, so that we can reference them within our environment. And again, we're utilizing DNS. Requests will come in over port 53 UDP. Now, here we see GSLB and lovely bright pictures, well, lovely bright colors and boxes. And this is just here to show you the relationship between the different entities. So we look at site A. Okay, we've got our service, the red IP address sitting there, the red server sitting on the left, going up through to the load balancer, going up through to the GSLB service A, to our global server load balancing. But under our global server load balancing here on the left, we've also got site or service B. And service B points to the load balanced virtual service sitting in site B that fronts our blue and green servers. So this is the relationship that we will have between our entities. So what would happen is the request will come into site A saying, right, I'm wanting communication from a specific service. Well, in this scenario that I've got here, well, actually, the blue service isn't served from site A, but I can get across to it from my load balancer crossover point that we've got in the middle. So you've got that tie-in. It allows us that proximity to sort of work with the environment. Now, when we're configuring sort of GSLB, I like to think we've got 5 steps, okay? And each step is repeated on each of the ADC systems on each site. So if you've got GSLB that sits in Americas, EMEA, and an APJ, you would need to do these 5 steps in each site, okay? And it is worth noting that it will not work until the FQDN is bound to the V server of the environment. And once all sites, virtual servers, services are reported as up, what the administrator can do then is customize your DNS, your GSLB methods, persistence, and site affinity as they see fit. So it's always crucial to do these 5 steps before talking about your customizations. Now, when enabling, I spoke about proximity-based GSLB. When enabling the method, we want an ADC to make our load balancing decisions based on our proximity of the client's local DNS server. So we're going and calling our local DNS. So I'm based in EMEA, so I'm calling my ISP's DNS server that is in EMEA, and it's going to say, well, actually, I sit within a segment that's associated to Europe, go to Europe. And it can be measured both dynamically or statically. Now, the dynamic determination of proximity is based on your current network status, while the static determination of proximity is based on the geographical location of the client's LDNS and the sites that the client is accessing, so the sites that I'm accessing. The main benefit of the proximity-based GSLB method is that you get faster response times resulting from a selection of closest available sites. Another thing to note of the 2 methods is that dynamic network proximity is gauged by RTT to the LDNS host only. So it's your round trip time to the LDNS host. Now, I know, or we know, that a lot of folks that join our master classes want to see some CLI. And here, you know, I spoke about the 5 steps you're wanting to make sure that you do when you're setting up a GSLB environment. And here are the 5 steps, sort of in a nutshell, as command line entities that I've pushed into PuTTY. And you can see how simple it is. With these 5 steps, I can go to each one of my ADCs, and I've got a GSLB environment defined. The GUI has come a long way over the years, and I love looking at this GUI. When I was looking at it for the call today, you know, you look at the GSLB. I've just highlighted the GSLB node, the GSLB tab here, And we've got deployment topologies as an examples. You know, we've got active site, we've got active passive sites as well, and we've got parent-child topology. It gives you examples of the types of topologies that you can deploy within a global server environment, with bits of explanation that you can sort of fill in the blanks to match your needs. And you know, we've got the getting started wizard at the bottom here for you to click through. But just for sake of clarity, you know, if we go and do it manually, what we're wanting to do is we want to go to traffic management, GSLB, go to sites. We're wanting to define our local or remote site, and you'll see the remote site in the next slide. Our site IP addresses, parent site, backup parent site, so on, and what we're wanting our triggers to be, or what we're wanting our monitorings to be as well. And we go through this, define the services, what site name it is. You know, I've got this one sitting as a remote site. This is now me crisscrossing over, using my example from earlier, to get access to the other environments. And then once I'm there, I need to bind the services to the virtual server and the FQDN to get it all operational and interactive with my environment. So with ADNS, you know, I've got to set up the ADNS service, what my server details are, what the protocol is, what the port is. And by default, the service does not depend on a back end. So you don't necessarily have to be forcing this to a back-end DNS server at all. Syncing GSLB configurations, you know, this is very crucial. As we did with the HA, we wanted to make sure that we can synchronize to our remote sites. And the three key things that aids in configuration of the GSLB in multiple location, requires configurations on only one unit, and overrides any GSLB configurations on the target unit, so you don't get any mismatch or any conflicts in regard to servicing content to your users. Now, if we take it to the next level, you know, we've spoken about HA, we've spoken about GSLB, we're wanting to talk about scale in general. Okay, now we talk about scale in general, and we've got on-demand scale and we've got on-demand licensing. Now, as I build this slide out, you know, Dave spoke to me, asked the question before we went to the demo, well, like, you know, what about firmware? What's the details there? Do they need to be the same? And things like that. And I said, it has to be the same, it has to be the same platform. So VPX 3000, it has to be the same for HA. When it comes to the likes of clustering, and top left-hand corner, you know, clustering of the Citrix ADCs, you can have up to 32 Citrix ADCs all participating in a cluster. That gives you a potential of 6.4 terabytes of capacity. Now, to participate in a cluster, you can be any platform. Okay, so that is the main thing. Obviously, you need to make sure that your license allows for clustering, but you can be a VPX 3000, you can be an MPX if you like, whatever. So that is very, very beneficial, and the fact that it is that active, always on scenario. So you never have to really worry about making sure that the failover will work, because it's there all day, every day. The auto scale in the cloud, you know, we've got two types there. You've got front-end auto scaling and back-end auto scaling. So back-end auto scaling is the example of if the back-end environment is feeling under pressure, we can then have your cloud environment spin up additional back-end resources to meet the need. And similarly, you know, if your front-end environment is getting hit with a lot of requests, we can do the front-end auto scaling to bring up additional ADCs to meet that need. Now, as we go over to the licensing on the right-hand side, you know, we can deploy pooled licensing capabilities. Absolutely brilliant in that, you know, I can have a pooled license and share my license environment across my multiple ADCs. So in an HA environment, I will have two VPX 3000s, two licenses on there. One is active, one is passive. With this environment, I've got VPX licenses or whatever license, whatever throughput license I've got. I can define what the throughput I want and then assign that to a specific node. So very, very important there. Our burst licensing, something that I see used a lot in the retail sector. When we come up to the likes of Black Friday, Cyber Monday, coming up toward the Christmas periods for heavy sales online, organizations say, well, actually, I'm only going to see a big hit on my infrastructure at these specific times. Well, with burst licensing, you have the ability to sort of burst up to 25% of your throughput without sort of getting any surprise bills in the post, and it's easy enough to pay as you grow. And as I say, if you're using it with the clustering, even better, you can deploy the licenses through the pool capacity. Now, no system, when we're talking about disaster recovery, HA, whatever, would be solid without knowing what's going on in the back end or at the front end. So you're wanting to be able to make sure that you can monitor the environments, and with real-time information from the ADM, we can track the ADC capacity on licensing from a single point across your full ADC deployment or fleet. We can see what's going on with certain instances, what the back end's doing, what the front end's doing. So they become extremely important, especially in today's world. And just as an aside, as we switch completely to sort of another way of thinking away from the business continuity, well, from the HA and business continuity, but looking at this is a little bit about business continuity as well. All about don't be scanned by BCP. And this is something that's come out recently. It's been issued by the National Cybersecurity Centre here in the UK, Department of Homeland Security in the US, the Cyber Security and Infrastructure Security Agency in the US as well, about how nefarious actors are actually targeting healthcare and essential services at the current time. Obviously, it's rife at the moment. And what you want to be able to do is you want to be able to monitor it. Okay, that's pretty easy. But if there is a DDoS attack that's going against your systems that you would see here, you wanting to be able to identify it and mitigate against it. So having that intuitive system sitting in the back end with the Citrix analytics platforms, we have the ability to analyze, assess, and make recommendations of what systems need to be shut down, what communication trunks need to be severed, so that we can protect against this. So that's just an aside, and also gives us a nice segue as we shift into the next part of the session today. So I'll hand it back to you, Dave, unless we've got
Fantastic.
some questions.
We do actually have a really interesting one that just came up, and seems to be popping up quite a bit now. Some people are asking, and just would be interested if you could briefly describe the difference between clustering and an HA pair and why you would want to use one versus the other.
Okay, so I'll give you a really, really short answer. I could go on forever, but I know I'm already over my time. A really simple thing to think about that one, folks, difference between HA and clustering. HA, active, passive. 2 nodes, that's it, active, passive. Clustering, up to 32 nodes, all active. So, I made reference to saying, well, if you don't often check your failover scenarios, so you kind of want to put it into a disaster recovery test every maintenance sort of quarter or things like that to know if the secondary node will work. With clustering, it's always on. So that's number one. That's one big benefit from me. That's a big shout out. The second one for me is scale. The ability to meet with HA, I'm restricted by the license that I've got on that HA environment. I've been using the VPX 3000 as an example. So 3 gigabits of throughput. With the cluster, I have potential of going up to terabytes of throughput. So again, the scale really comes into it. So 2 things: active, passive against active all the way through all nodes, and then the throughput capacity that you can achieve with a clustered environment.
Ooh, that's quite a bit. Awesome. Fantastic. Thank you so
Okay,
much, Michael.
no problem.
All right. So thanks so much for sharing all of that and some great wisdom there, Michael. Fantastic presentation, a lot of content, a lot of detail there, and we're still getting so many questions on it. I'm afraid to jump straight to the next topic. So if you wouldn't mind hanging out for a little bit and seeing if you can get back to some of the questions in the Q&A, that'd be fantastic. So I just wanted to thank you, Michael. And before we head into our next session, our next topic, I just want to let everyone know that we are going to have a surprise giveaway. So we will have a giveaway today at the end of the webinar, and today's prize is a Nest Hub Max. So these are pretty neat. They can do all kinds of stuff. So if you weren't paying attention before, pay attention going forward, and I will ask a question from some of the content or some part of the content going forward in the webinar today, and the winner for that will be able to take or receive the prize after the end of the webinar. So with that, I'd like to change topics now and go into our next segment here, and this will be on ADC as a service. So with that, I'd like to bring Avinash on. So Avinash, I see you are muted. If I can get you to come off mute.
Hi, Dave. Could you make me a presenter, please?
All right, you've got it.
Thank you. Thanks, Mike. That's for the wonderful session. Hello, everyone. My name is Avinash Kumar. I'm from Citrix product management team. With me, we have a Balaji. Today, I'm going to discuss about ADC service, the intent-based application delivery. I'm sure you're excited about this introduction of ADC service, and this is the first time we are coming up with this ADC service. So today I brought 2 characters or 2 user personas, which the interaction with these 2 user personas will give more understanding about ADC service in a very simplified way. So we have Paul, the Citrix sales, and Alex from the customer side. Please watch the screen to get in and enjoy the interaction between these 2 folks. Well, the key point over here is ADC service is a pure SaaS, and it will do both application delivery and the application security part for public clouds. As of now, we support AWS cloud, and within 2 quarters, we're going to support Azure cloud too. So the key value out of ADC service is the intent-based application delivery driven with self-healing. The brain behind ADC service is machine learning. So all the self-healing actions will be taken care by the machine learning algorithms. So this is the live demo of ADC service. This is my ADC service account, which is hosted from Citrix Cloud Production account. So this is a key cycle of ADC service, and it has 4 stages where a customer has to give his intent. It could be a business intent or a functional intent. That intent will be translated into policy, which will eventually pushed into the infra, which is our well-tested and proven ADCs. And the analytics will give the real-time traffic details, and then based on that, it even gives you the anomalies detected over the real-time traffic. Then comes the assurance part, which is where we're going to use the machine learning so that whatever the anomalies are detected will be taken care, and then a proper self-corrective action is taken care so that the intent is always in the desired state or of the respective customer. The first step of Citrix ADC service is to create a cloud access profile, and this is a one-time setup. This will create a list of permissions required by the ADC service to do application delivery in customer premises. In this case, it could be AWS VPC or Azure VNet. As of now, we support AWS Cloud. Click on Deliver an application. We can access profile which is related to the application servers which are posted on the AWS. So this is one of my application profile, and where I have a couple of web applications over there. Select the region where your web applications are running. In this case, it is Ohio. It will dynamically pull all the VPCs in that region. And there are three ways to select the servers. It could be EC2 instances, or by giving the IP, or an auto-scaling backend server. ADC service is integrated with AWS Route 53, which is the DNS zone or DNS of AWS. So here I have a couple of DNS zone hosted in AWS Route 53. Let me pick this. And this will be my FQDN for this application, demomasterclass.citrixns.com. As you can see, each and accordion will even highlight all the key details which is being filled by you. And the other next would be is to give the application endpoint. It could be HTTP or HTTPS. If it is HTTPS, you have to upload your certain key. And by default, the load balancing settings are set to the best, so that the customer don't have to change any default settings, and these are set to the SSL offloading. You have advanced option to make any tweaks. Now, the other state of application delivery is to get the application security for that application. Here you have a toggle button to enable or disable the application security. As of now, you could see the key protections here: the SQL injection protection, the cross-site scripting protection, buffer overflow protection, geo blocking, and IP repetition blocking. In a quarter time, you will see the support for bot protection, signature protection, and even the dynamic learning, which is based on, again, machine learning. You can even add exceptions if you want some relaxation to be done for those requirements based on your customer profile or your user data traffic profile. The application deployment happens in 3 stages. Prepare the environment and look for the ADC infrastructure and the state of the infrastructure, and to go ahead with the next stages, which is deploy the application. This will take around 1 minute of time. As this application is in progress state, I'll pick an application which is deployed state. Let's pick demo app today. And if a user tries to do any cross-site scripting, it will be blocked, and then it will give it access denied page. The next for ADC service is analytics. Analytics will give the consolidated data of all the applications with multiple things, vary from application score to all the key metrics, and the application score even segregates based on the state of the application. If any application is critical, then you can pick that application. It will filter based on that. Click on an application to do a deep dive. You can even change the time horizon from 1 hour to 1 month here. As you could see here, I have around 3 backend applications running over here, web applications. Out of them, 2 are up and 1 is down. It gives a state of multiple backend services. And it even gives the key metrics like response time, error percentage, request per second, throughput, total connections, and data volume. Click on the one which you want and the graphs will change respectively. And the next one is the anomaly detection or the issues. Based on the real-time traffic, it gives anomalies. These anomalies will be taken care by the self-corrective actions, which will be taken, where the backend happens by the machine learning. Coming back to the interaction between Paul and Sid and Alex, the highlight over here is Alex didn't pick any ADC instance type or the network plumbing. Ideally, he has to do it. And the key thing to observe over here would be the ADC service is open for customers, the tech preview, and we are open for inputs from the customer. One common challenge is all the customers have the challenge of the BCP task. However, this entire ADC service will take around 15 minutes, and in future you don't have to worry about any of the business continuity planning tasks, because ADC service is a SaaS one, and then it will take care of all the requirements and in dynamic way. You can even reach to any application admin of your enterprise or cloud actor to know more about, and he might be interested for the ADC service. And one more key highlight for this is it actually takes only 15 minutes for the entire ADC service tech preview. Well, the vision of ADC service is to support the business intent. Are you aware of self-driving cars? And once you're into a self-driving car, you have to give a voice command saying that drop me at Orlando Airport. This could be your intent. That will actually show you the optimal route and even show the travel time. And then the car will start driving and reroute based on the traffic conditions. On the similar lines, there is a big shift happening from the manual to automatic of networking. That shift needs business intent driven scenarios, where in this case, I have one of the example where my business intent is to deliver applications and ensure that app latency has to be less than 400 milliseconds. This business intent will be converted into the feasibilities and the config, and then it will be orchestrated in the infra. And the analytics will give the anomalies based on the real-time traffic. Those anomalies will be taken care by the self-corrective actions, so that the business intent is always in the desired state and it's always met. The key value proposition of ADC service comes under two buckets. One is agility and the other is best experience. With ADC service, it's going to be zero-touch app delivery. It's an intent-based workflow and simplified deployment. And with respect to experience, it's you want to have very minimal term, and this is the service you will want to have an SLA for this, driven by self-healing and ensure best app performance. And self-healing is taken care by machine learning. Now to the poll questions.
Sure. Which one would you like?
The second one, are you interested in that one?
Oh, okay. All right, let's go ahead and launch the poll. Yep. So we're just bringing up a poll for everyone. And the question is, are you interested in the ADC service tech preview or using it? So we looks pretty much 50-50. If I were to say right now, I think we'll just keep the poll for just a moment longer if you kindly provide some of your feedback or answer yes or no. All right, I think we're good. I'm going to go ahead and close that out, Avinash.
Thanks, Dave. We have one more question.
Sure. First one?
Third one.
Got you. Okay. Final question. Which cloud So we're interested to understand if you are using public cloud to host your web applications, which cloud are you currently using today? We see an interesting spread here across being Citrix. We're in a unique position where we see a lot of our customers using Azure for the virtual desktop, but we're also seeing those who have rebuilt their apps or are deploying web apps specifically, where predominantly we're seeing that in AWS. So your feedback today would be very valuable for us to help understand which direction our audience is interested in pursuing the most. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close out the poll. And just to show everyone the feedback, it looks like still on-prem is key in demand, with the runner-up being Azure and other private clouds.
Thank you, Dave.
All right, thanks, Avinash. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and introduce our next presenter for our next topic, which is the API Gateway. So with that, I'm going to bring up Pushkar. Pushkar, I've taken you off mute.
Great, thank you.
All
Can
right.
you make me presenter as well?
Will do, just a second here. Okay, you've got it.
Okay. All right, Avinash, that was wonderful. The demo was very exciting, and the very fact that I can just spin up things in 15 minutes sounds very, very interesting. So, okay, on to the next topic, the Citrix API Gateway. So the agenda is as follows. We're going to talk about, what it means for what does it mean from the business perspective for doing API security, right? And your APIs are exposed not only in your traditional environment or in cloud, they are also exposed via this new way of delivering application, which is a cloud native application. So we're going to break up the session. First, we'll talk about the business problem and then kind of talk about how we solve this issue of API securing your APIs in a multi-cloud environment with traditional applications, and then we look into the microservices-based application and how we can apply the same principle. The consumption models in these two places kind of differs, and what I am trying to kind of convey in today's call is kind of how we adapt for these different kind of application delivery to secure those APIs. So why APIs, right? So 80% of the web traffic is now API. So this is from Akamai in 2018. So I think it is probably increased even more now, but I think this is the little web traffic in your internet today, right? And given that a lot of important resources are behind these API, what it means is now this becomes a haven for all the hackers to attack, right? So that's what Gartner kind of analyzed and says that, hey, by 2021, your exposed APIs will be a larger surface area for attacks, right? And we have seen that happen with recent hacks. So Citrix, when you talk about Citrix comprehensively, Citrix with its single code base, which can work across multiple form factors of ADCs, provides you a consistent security posture, whether you are running your ADCs on-prem or if you are running your ADCs in cloud, right? And along with that, along with just doing the application delivery, which is load balancing, we also provide a lot of security postures, right? So if you are using security features from Citrix on-prem, you should be able to use those same toolings, those same behavior when you go to a cloud. And these are kind of fundamentally built on these 7 pillars, which I'm showing over here, right? So our differentiator over here clearly is the WAF, the web application firewall, which kind of protects your applications against the bad traffic, some known traffics, as well as the one which could be potentially a danger for you, right? So those kind of traffic is kind of protected by your web app firewall. Also, there has been a lot of increase in bot traffic in your internet, right? So how do you differentiate between a good traffic and a bad traffic, and how you kind of prevent your APIs or applications from going down, right? So bot management becomes another differentiator in this whole solution. And of course, the topic of today, which is API Gateway, these are not working in silos. These all work together to provide you a consistent security posture. And the cool thing about Citrix is through a pooled premium license, you get all of these features in a single place, right? And the API gateway or API protection is designed for both your cloud as well as microservices-based architecture, so it can be used in different environments, right? Along with that, we have been like your API should be secure. So maybe you want to kind of have a high performing API platform, you need to make sure your SSL offloading capability, TLS offloading capability. Not only that, once you have all these things in place, you need to have visibility into your applications, right? So providing analytics on top of those with machine learning and kind of predicting, the potential problems or blocking the current problems. So those are all tied together, and this makes a comprehensive Citrix application API security platform. Right. So now I'm going to switch the gears slightly and focus on API. So we know that what I have established so far is our solution can be worked across normal applications as well as API. And API is the new digital currency in this world, right? And if you look at the typical way of how this API is consumed, typically there is some kind of a API management tools. So API management tool is for, publishing, documenting, and scaling your APIs. And there is some kind of a touch point with the API gateway, which provides certain services for you, right? And in the next slide, I will talk about what are those services which this developer and API management depend on. And there I go. So, right, for example, based on the API request, I should have a capability of routing a particular API request to a right backend, right? So you could have path-based routing or HTTP parameter-based routing. And basically discovering your right backend service based on the API call becomes very important, and that's where API gateway features shine. And of course, the load balancing capability, when you scale up your backend services, you should be able to load balance those applications depending on the algorithms of your choice, right? With the API request, the security is very tightly coupled. Like if you think about who is accessing my API backends, right? Is he authorized to access it, right? What if he's sending too much requests at the same time? I want to make sure he's rate limited. And so all this functionality come with that. Not only that, you can, on top of this, you can build the web application firewall, bot management capabilities. It all falls under the umbrella of securing your API request, right? Also, API gateway also provide you functionality like mediation, right? So doing transformation between the different protocols, right? For example, there is a SOAP request which comes in, and the backend I want to convert into REST-based API. Or, I have my traditional application and I have a modern application, and I need to convert, do a translation between those. So transformation becomes one of the key features, along with the fact that I want to have good performance. So caching becomes really important, where I can provide, instead of going to backend for everything, I can provide you a lot of information through caching itself. And then you tie all this together with visibility. So you need deep analytics, tracing, log capabilities, etc. And then as we move forward, we'll talk about how do we integrate with different tools out there, along with our ADM, which provides you analytics, logging, and visibility, right? So when it comes to value prop, if you typically go to any customer today, typically they have ADC, which is a load balancer from, say, a vendor A. They typically have, they would have invested in an API gateway solution from vendor C. And if they are using Kubernetes, again, they need to have an ingress controller, so they get ingress from vendor B. And then again, I can go on and on, like they might have WAF from some other third party. So I think our real value is basically consolidating all those platforms from a single place. And the value add that brings along with that is, now I can have a lower latency for my applications. It doesn't have to go through these multiple hops. I have less number of TCP connection to maintain state of. I have less management. So basically, you're improving on your OpEx on this one, right? And total cost of ownership overall, instead of going to all these vendors, right? And also, when there is any security patches, which we have seen in the past, security patches comes along. Now you have to tag along to all of these vendors to get your security patches. So what if you had a single place where you could go, and all of your different modules which you require in your data center is provided by a single source, right? So which is Citrix in this case. So that's the value prop for having our solution. And API gateway, along with what I just talked around API protection, which is security and optimization, routing, etc. There are a bunch of other features. So what you see on this screen in green in color is what we support today. And the blue versions are something which are either planned for future, or we have not completed those features yet. So that's what I'm trying to highlight here. So we shine really with AAA functionality, security, load balancing, routing, and we have these tons of features which we're going to cover as we progress forward in this discussion. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to turn it over to Ritesh, who is our star engineer who has worked on this solution. Dave, can you help me move it to Ritesh, please?
Will do. All right, Ritesh, you are the presenter now. All right, we see the screen.
All right. Yes. Yes. Thank you very much. Thank you, Pushkar. That was pretty good information on API Gateway. Hello, everybody. My name is Ritesh Patani, and I'll be walking you through the HMC solution for the Citrix API Gateway solution for the hybrid multi-cloud environment. Sorry, there was some problem with the slide. All right. So this is a typical API lifecycle. As you can see, API developer, they typically start with designing their APIs. And what this generally means is they start with a Swagger or open API specification. Once they are done and then they are ready to deploy the APIs, then they typically give these to the API admin. And in many cases, API gateways, some of them are able to import these API specification file to configure the runtime API proxy. And in some instances, they can also use this information to configure the policies. So here, what I'm showing you is a sample of a Swagger specification file. In this case, it happens to be a patch store application. And as you can see in this Swagger specification, you will be able to see basic information about the API, such as the version, the title, the base path, and above all, I think the most important information that is there is the definition of all the API resources and the methods on those resources. In this case, it is a /pat, and then the method is get, and then you'll be able to see the parameters that the get method expects. So in this case, it is the patch ID and other things. And apart from these, specification also has information on what kind of responses are expected when somebody sends a request to these paths. So now I'm going to demo the feature which allows Citrix API Gateway solution to onboard API using the OAS specification file. So for this demo purpose, I have this setup here, which I'm going to use the patch store Swagger specification, and then I'm going to make use of the ADM, which is a Citrix solution for application delivery management, and I'm going to use Citrix API Gateway. As you can see here, for the demo purpose, what I'm assuming that we will have the patch store application, which will be behind the Citrix API Gateway. So Citrix API Gateway is expected to proxy the API traffic that is coming from API clients and going towards the patch store app server application service. For the demo purpose, what I have assumed that the patch store application is implemented as two microservices, patch store service and patch store user service. And the way we want to set up the routing here is for any request that comes for the URI path starting with /pat, we want to route it to patch store service. And for any request that comes for the path that starts with /user, I want to route it to patch store user service. So now let's take a look at how to do this in the using the Citrix ADM solution. So here I'll be showing you a demo. Oops. Sorry about that. All right, so here I'm going to go to the Citrix ADM and I'm going to go to the API gateway. I'm going to start with onboarding the API. So I have a OS specification file for pet store and I'm going to upload that. As you can see, ADM is able to parse through the specification file and it's able to see all the API resource paths and methods that are defined there. So everything looks good. I'm going to go ahead and create this API. So now the API definition is done. I want to make sure it's looking good. So it's looking good. Now I'll go ahead and deploy this API. So in this deployment, what we want to do is we are creating an instance of the pet store API. I'm going to call this as pet store sandbox and selecting the target API gateway. And I'm now configuring the API proxy, which will be fronting all the traffic that is coming for this API. And it will be on this IP address 10.217.2.136. Now it happens to be SSL, so I'm going to configure the certificate and key. Okay, and as I mentioned on the previous slide, we have two upstream services, so I'm configuring the upstream service, pet store service. And it's listening on IP 10.217.2.39. So I'm configuring that. And now I will be adding another upstream service for pet store user APIs. Right. So now I'll go ahead and configure the API routing. So what we want to do, as I mentioned before, for any APIs that comes with the path starting with /pet, I want to route it to the upstream service pet store service. I'll go ahead and add that route. And for any traffic that is coming for /user or any traffic that is starting with /user, I want to route it to pet store user. So, all right, so I have created this deployment. Now, as you can see, I will go ahead and now configure the policies for this traffic. So I'll start with the policies on the pet store user. Okay, so here what I want to do is for any traffic that is coming for URI path starting with /pet, I don't want that to be authenticated, so that I added the no auth. However, for that I do want to rate limit that traffic. So here I'm going to configure the rate limit for this traffic. I'm configuring 10 requests per second, and I want to respond with standard 429 response if it exceeds that allowed limit. Now I'm going to go ahead and add the policies for the user APIs. So as you can see, it shows me all the URI paths that are starting with /user. I'm going to configure the authentication for that, and I'm going to use the JWT validation as an authentication mechanism. So here I'm configuring the OAuth parameters for validating the tokens. So I'll be getting the certificate from the pet store key service, and I'm configuring the issuer who is going to be the issuer for the authentication tokens, and I'm configuring the audience. Now I'll go ahead and add the rate limit policy. So again, I want to limit this to 10 requests per second. And if it exceeds, I want to respond with the standard 429. So as you can see here, I was able to configure the policies. And so as you can see here, in 3 simple steps, I was able to onboard the API for the pet store APIs. And just in 3 simple steps, I was able to easily configure this on the API gateway. Now I'll go ahead and move to the next feature. So the other feature that we have on the ADM is if some of you are familiar with ADM, then there is a feature called style books. These style books are basically templates which allow you to simplify the complex ADC configurations. So for the API gateway solution, we have these style books available now. The style book is generally for the advanced user who are familiar with the style book feature and who are familiar with ADC constructs. But it can also be used by users who, let's say, do not have the open API specification and would like to configure the policies manually. They can also make use of these features. So what I have here is the screenshots for the style book. As you can see here, I'm able to show that, okay, these style book, I'm able to configure the proxy parameters and then the route parameters. And here I'm able to configure the rate limit policy on the API for the pet store, for the pet traffic. So now with this, I will hand it over to Dhanikant, who will walk you through the API gateway solution for the cloud native environment. And Dave, can I get your help in transitioning to Dhanikant?
Sure. Do we want to run a quick poll before we proceed?
Yes, please.
All right. So you just saw a fantastic presentation on API Gateway. This is new, brand new for us. And so we would be very interested now to get some feedback from the audience. Are you interested in API Gateway, or more specifically, are you interested in using it? So this is a brand new idea and concept for us at Citrix. So looks like we're getting some good feedback here, maybe a little bit of a mix. So I'll keep the poll open for just a moment. If you want to take a second just to go up there and fill it out for us, it's much appreciated and helps us understand, did we strike an interest?
Hey,
All
Dave,
right.
just to add, even though the workflow and the concept of API gateway might be new, but it's building on top of existing ADC. So we're using the high performance ADC to deliver API gateway functionality and the features and the WAF and the bot management, which is already built. So it's all bringing all the good stuff together and packaging in an easy to use manner for API protection.
Absolutely. Thanks, Tushar. Also, we have the question here, and maybe this could be answered by yourself or Pushkar. And the question is, why would someone want to use, say, the Citrix API Gateway instead of something else that's already in the industry? Because there are some other API gateways out there.
I just responded to that. It's the answer is somewhere in between.
Yep.
So,
yeah.
So again, the same thing, right? We provide a complete solution which provides performance, security, availability, all the HA stuff which Michael talked about applies to API Gateway. And we have a solution for both HMC and cloud native. We covered HMC part, Dharni will cover the cloud native. And the API Gateway is managed through ADM, so you get all the goodness of ADM, plus the analytics which is built on top of the ADM framework, which can give you rich data on your usage, anomalies. So all the stuff comes together in one package.
Yeah, so and I'll just add one more point. I think you covered everything, Tushar. So the key point is, like, there are vendors out there, they have a kind of a point focus solution. They either work well in on-prem environment and then they fail in cloud, or the other way around, or again, they work well in a traditional environment and they don't work well in a cloud native application. So you have a cohesive network fabric with security, which can span across all these environments. And that becomes a real differentiator, and not to discount the fact that having multiple vendors versus having one does have good OpEx and, just the overall management overhead reduction.
All right, fantastic. So we continue.
All right.
Yep, Dara?
I'm learning. I'll be talking about the API gateway solution in cloud native environments. So our API gateway solution in cloud native is built on top of the Citrix Ingress solution. Some of you may be familiar with it. Essentially, what it means is we're going to use all the Kubernetes constructs to manage our Ingress, which is our ADC. So the API gateway solution is built on top of that. So it's very simple to deploy and also configure. So for deployment,
Dara, I just want to pause you for a second. It looks like we're having some trouble with your screen updating. Would you be able to just stop the sharing and restart it?
Okay.
Right here, perhaps I'll switch the presenter role here and give it back to you. Okay, we're going to make you presenter again.
Okay.
And we're just waiting for that to come up. Okay, we're good. We see your slide now.
Okay, great. All right, so as I was talking about, it's very simple to deploy using the Helm charts. And we also use CRDs, which is a part of the Kubernetes for configuration. So the main difference in our HMC and cloud native solutions is how you configure it and where it is deployed. So in case of HMC, as we have seen before, so it's pretty much we use the ADM to configure, whereas cloud native solution, we use the Kubernetes constructs. So for observability, we have integrated with very popular open source tools like Kibana, Elasticsearch, Prometheus, and others. We'll talk about it a little bit. And performance-wise, as you know, the different form factors for ADC are industry-leading in terms of number of transactions and latency, throughput, and the number of rules that you can create. So all these things will carry over to our API gateway solution as well. So let's talk about a little bit on the configuration, which is the main difference here. So in Kubernetes, there is something called custom resources. So you may be familiar with different Kubernetes objects like pods, services, and deployments, things like that. These are all inbuilt Kubernetes objects that you can configure. So for example, you want to configure your own objects, but that may be because your Ingress device might need some sort of configuration that needs to be given to some means. So Kubernetes has provided this custom resource definition. So wherein you can create your own objects, and then once you create them, then they just act like a built-in Kubernetes objects, like in the sense that you can use the kubectl CLI to manipulate them, and they get the same sort of security, RBAC, replication, and lifecycle management, and how they work. So these are powerful constructs on how to extend the Kubernetes in general, and how you can add more features and functionality to your device. So Citrix API gateway solution leverages these CRDs for providing this configuration. So in one way, we are trying to simplify the configuration in the sense that instead of creating several ADC objects, by using a simple YAML file, you'll be able to configure whatever you are trying to achieve. So let's see how the CRDs are working in here. And there are two things. One is what we call as the schema CRD schema, and then there is the instance. So the schema is just like your UI, in the sense that UI shows you what you need to enter. So the schema specifies you what you can enter and what are the format of data that you can use and all that stuff. And the actual instance is where you configure your data. So just like you enter values on the GUI fields, you create this instance. So the schemas is usually developed by the developers and is packaged with your software, whereas the actual instance files is what user creates when he wants to configure something. There is another example for a different CRD. Let's quickly see how it all works. So in Kubernetes, there is something called a Kubernetes API server, and this is where all CLI commands that you type in will go to. And there is a component in the solution which is called Citrix Ingress Controller, which listens to these events, and then it configures Citrix ADC. So first you do the schema. Once the schema is done, then you can go and configure your actual instance. So when the instance comes in, Ingress Controller knows what is the Citrix ADC to target, and it uses the existing APIs to configure system. So under the hood, what happens? So Ingress Controller sends the commands to Citrix ADC, and it goes and configures all the objects that are needed. For example, we'll see in the demo what all things that you configure using the YAML files, and then what it translates to. So this is the demo setup today I have. So it is a solution with a single tier architecture. So wherein the Citrix ADC VPX is working as both as ingress as well as an API gateway. The clients can send traffic, and then once it comes to the API gateway, it enforces the policies, and then based on the policies, it directs the traffic or load balancers to the actual services. So here is a sample instance for the authentication CRD instance. So it has two sections. One is, if you observe here, it says the kind is auth policy. That means it is a CRD of type auth policy, and the instance name itself is auth hard drinks, and it is applicable to the front-end service. In this case, has two sections, which is auth providers and auth policies. The providers is where you actually configure the properties for your authentication server. So in this case, we are talking about, sorry. In this case, we are talking about authentication server, which is a Microsoft Azure. So the Azure gives you the JWKS URI, which is how do you get the keys that are required to verifying the tokens for an authentication service. So similarly, in case of, we can also do something called introspection, wherein you get opaque tokens that can be used. So here we are saying the resources which needs, like provider is empty, that means it doesn't require authentication, but others need authentication there. So now we have applied the policies, and once it is applied, we can check the status whether how it went through. So in this case, once status shows success, that means it is CRD is activated. So now we can run some traffic and see how it works. The first time sending the coffee, which doesn't require any authentication, so you are able to get the data immediately. Now, if I try T, which we said, which requires an authentication, it sends an unauthorized because it doesn't have any token. So now we are going to get some token from the Azure IDP. As you see, the token is there. And now we are going to use the token as part of the request We're going to send it. So if you see there, the token is inserted in the request now. We are sending the token, and now we are able to get the data. So that means the policies got applied, and once we provide the token, then it is allowing you to get access to the APIs on the backend services. So that's a simple demo on one of the features, which is authentication. Similarly, we have several other features that are available as part of our API gateway solution. And the way they are configured, some features we use CRDs, and they're listed here: the content routing, rate limiting, rewrite responder policies, and a few other features. Similarly, we use annotations for configuring other things like TCP profiles, SSL profile, where you can configure your SSL data. So that's about the main cloud native solution part. And we will now talk about observability. The observability aspects deals with analytics. And this is something which is common for both our HNC solution as well as our cloud native solution. So as I was talking, the only difference between them is where it is deployed and how it is configured. So from analytics perspective, they provide same kind of data, and you can leverage the same set of tools. In this case, we have integrated with open source tools like Kibana, Prometheus, and all. And this is made possible with our other component, what we call as Citrix Observability Exporter. This component converts the data that is produced by our runtime proxy, which is our ADC, into a format that is understandable to these tools like the Kibana or Prometheus and all. And it also gives the same data to our ADM. So you can choose whether you want to use open source tools or Citrix ADM, although they have their own advantages in the sense that Citrix ADM is purpose-built to work with our solutions. So you might get better integration and rich dashboards and all. So some of the reports are here, like today we have the API usage, authentication success failures, rate limits, latency, geolocation, and there are several other features that we are actively developing. So here is a snapshot of transaction logs that we are imported into the Elasticsearch. And these are the raw records that are converted in a form that is understandable by Elasticsearch. And you can build any reports, anything using this Elasticsearch. We also have integrated with Kibana. This is a very simple dashboard that just built for this demo, showing kind of API request distribution, request count that are received, and what kind of authentication used, and all, and some example traffic that we have generated. And this is kind of screenshots on our ADM solution. So using same kind of data, we have built dashboards on our ADM, which can give data on our API distribution, authentication failure success, and what are your top end APIs that are being accessed. And there are several other features and dashboards that are available as part of our ADM solution. So our HNC solution is in tech preview, and the docs will be up very soon. And for our cloud native solution, it's already available. These are some of the resources that you can refer to, and quick start guides, and how to deploy, and help charts, all these goodies. And we are open for questions at this time.
All right.
David, back to you.
Fantastic. Yes, that was great. Lots of complexity, very, very fascinating the way that you visualized it as well. Sometimes things with APIs are not very visual, so really appreciated the slides and then the actual use of Postman there to show kind of how you put some of that information together. So fantastic. So we don't have a lot of outstanding questions in the Q&A, but if you wouldn't mind sticking around for a little bit to answer if any come in over the next few minutes, that would be great. So thanks so much, Dara.
Thank you.
All right, so we've rounded out. We've just about nearly finished 2 full hours of this webinar. This is an exceptionally long time, so thank you everyone for sticking around with us. Now I'm just gonna finish up with some things that are happening more recently, what we've got going on, as well as discuss what we're doing at the next masterclass, and then our grand prize giveaway. And I'll have a question for the audience and for you guys to answer there to win our prize. So first up is our validated reference designs or design documents, or VRDs. You'll find these at the link at the bottom of the slide. They're a little bit buried under docs.citrix.com. But the good thing about the VRDs is they allow you to really go in and configure the advanced capabilities of the features that, like you saw today. So if you're interested in configuring HA in the cloud or configuring GSLB, for example, which Michael talked about in the beginning, we have a lot of that configuration detail available directly in the VRD document themselves, and in some cases native to the cloud as well. So if you're going through the docs, you're looking at the product documentation, and you're not quite clear on how to plug in GSLB in your environment, I invite you to take a look at the validated reference design documents to see if there may be a more complete or specific picture for you in your deployment there. Next up is we have a lot of videos that are posted regularly on YouTube under the Citrix TV account. I invite you to go to a more specific playlist for networking, and that's if you go to youtube.com/Citrix TV and you were to go down and drill down under the playlists area, there's one specifically for networking, and this is where you're going to find all the great videos that we post that do with networking, whether it's the ADC, ADM, or some of the brand new things that we're doing with SD-WAN. If you're interested or your focus is networking, I invite you to either copy this playlist right out of the slide and go to it, or dig down through YouTube and check out our networking videos there. We do constantly upload things, and in fact, I think we just had a brand new video put up this week as well. All right, so that rounds out our BCP for the ADC. Coming up, and this is actually by request, so this is one of those topics that we had a lot of people ask for. And in continuing that line of thought, we're going to have another session on BCP next month. So I invite you to join us in June for BCP, or Business Continuity Plan, for our SD-WAN product specifically. So next month, we'll have guest speakers Shoaib and Valerie talking about the SD-WAN and business continuity for what we're doing there, as well as Praveen talking about how we can do things with basically a non-VPN-based solution, or what we call VPN-less based solution for access control when you don't need to have a trust established with the device. So those are some interesting topics coming up, again, by request from you, the audience. And if you have any other topics that you'd like, I invite you to post a request in the Q&A panel for any topics that you would like to see coming up in a future networking masterclass. All right, now the exciting part. This is the time for our surprise today, our giveaway. Thanks for sticking around toward the end of this. So I'm going to ask a question from some of the content today. So it'll be a little bit tricky, but basically the way this works is I'm going to ask the question, and the first person to put the answer into the Q&A panel will be eligible to win the prize. Now, before I ask the question, I just request that if you've already won a prize from us in the last 6 months, to kindly just hold back a little bit so that we can share the prize to anyone new or anyone and give everyone an equal opportunity today. So with that, it may be a little bit tricky, but get ready, get your cursor focused on the Q&A panel, and the first answer wins the prize today. And this is a Nest Hub Max. So the question for the content today is, which Citrix product is used to configure our brand new API gateway? And perhaps this wasn't as tricky as I thought. We do have, it looks like, a winner. So the answer today is ADM. I thought I'd get a few more ADCs in there because the API gateway is a feature that runs on the ADC, but it is truly only configured from ADM. So congratulations, PJT. You've won the Hub Max from us. So we will contact you and follow up with you after the webinar to give you this fine prize. All right, well, that brings us to the end of another fantastic networking masterclass. And it remains only to thank the great crew of presenters, especially Michael Aldridge for staying up late in the afternoon and providing a great updated review and content on business continuity for the ADC. And also thank you to our audience for sticking around and sharing your time with us today and for making this so much fun with your questions. I'm Dave, and until next month, goodbye.